بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
We believe he exists based on verses of the Quran and traditions of the Prophet, as well as logical deductions. But that's not enough. You need to feel his existence. You need to recognize that he is here. Ayatollah Sheikh Ismail Namazi was one of the senior scholars in the Hawza in Mashhad. He was a brother, you might recognize his name perhaps, a brother to Ayatollah Sheikh Ali Namazi. Sheikh Ali Namazi is the author of a book called Mustadrak Safinatul Bihar, an excellent resource for anyone who can read Arabic, and perhaps there's a Farsi version available, I am not sure. But if you can read Arabic, and if you are looking for an introductory book on hadith and on the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, look up this book, Mustadrak Safinatul Bihar, which is an index of Bihar al-Anwar. Not only is it an index, but he has selected certain traditions and beautiful ahadith and included them in that index, and he has even provided some commentary. Absolutely great resource. His brother is the one to whom the story takes place. He's the central character of this story. Ayatollah Sheikh Ismail Namazi, remember this name. Sheikh Ismail tells the story to several of his students and his contemporaries. But if that weren't enough, he is actually recorded on video telling the story. It's on YouTube, and he speaks in Farsi. So look him up, Ayatollah Sheikh Ismail Namazi. The story goes something like this. In 1956, he decides to go to Hajj from Mashhad, the holy city of Mashhad, to the Atabat Aliyat, as they say, in Mecca and in Medina. And so he goes with a particular caravan. This caravan consisted of a bus filled with pilgrims who stay together from beginning to end, from the start of the journey until they return back to Mashhad. And they also would go through Iraq after performing the pilgrimage to Hajj. So after Mecca and Medina, they'd go to Karbala, Najaf, Samarra, Kadhimain. So he left with this caravan. The caravan had a driver, the bus had a driver and an assistant driver. The driver's name was Mahmoud Agha. The assistant driver's name, this is relevant, the assistant driver's name was Asghar Agha. He says that on the onward journey from Mashhad to Hijaz, to Mecca and Medina, Mahmoud Agha was the main driver. He says, we performed Hajj, we performed the rituals of the pilgrimage, we went to Medina, now we're getting ready to head towards Iraq. To go to Iraq from Medina, from Mecca, you have to go through a stretch of desert called Ar-Rub' al-Khali, the empty quarter. The empty quarter, you can look it up on Wikipedia. It is the largest contiguous desert stretch in the world. It stretches more than 250,000 miles, 500 miles across, and 200 miles or 250. And it's a massive stretch of land. It has hills, it has valleys. It goes up and it goes down. But the one common denominator throughout this desert is that it's filled with sand. And the sands keep shifting because there are sandstorms, and so it doesn't have one single appearance to it. It keeps changing its appearance. One day there's a cliff here, the next day it's completely gone because the wind moves the sand and shifts it around. He says, on the way back, we got on the bus, and the authorities back then would bring together 100 buses together so they could all travel at the same time. Sending one bus on its own would be too risky. 2 buses, a little risky. So instead they would bring and combine 100 buses, and they would be a contingent that traveled through the empty quarter, this massive desert. He says, so we got into our bus. Mahmoud Agha, who was the main driver, he drove the bus for a while, then he got tired. Asghar Agha said, let me drive. So he takes command of the vehicle. Because they were one of 100 buses, they happened to be all the way in the back. So Asghar Agha was probably a younger man who got bored, felt that the buses ahead were driving too slowly. He said, you know what? I'm going to overtake these buses. So he started driving faster and faster until he overtook all of the buses, but continued to drive at a very fast speed. Ayatollah Sheikh Ismail Namazi says, I kept telling him, don't do this, stick together, wait for the other buses, don't go on your own. But he kept saying, no, it's okay, we have enough fuel, we have enough gas, we have water, we have food, there's nothing to be worried about. And we know this is the asphalt road and it takes us all the way to the Iraqi-Hijazi border. There's nothing to be worried about. But because of the sandstorms and because of the shifting landscape, the sand covered the asphalt. Now you're in the middle of the biggest contiguous desert in the world and you don't know where the road is. Asghar Agha kept telling them, but that's still okay, we'll manage, because I can guess the direction we need to keep going, and I'll keep going that way. So they say that they kept going and going and going and going until it was Maghrib time. They have no idea where the main road is. They have no idea which way they're going. They've already traveled a couple of 100 miles and there's no sign of the border. They should have reached the border by this time. Ayatollah Namazi says, I told him, you know what? Stop. It's getting dark out. Let's camp and let's spend the night out here before we run out of fuel and we run out of water. Because the biggest danger is not only that we get lost, but we run out of these things. If the bus stops, what are we going to do in the middle of the desert? There's no one to be found, nothing to be seen. He says, so we stopped the bus, we camped out, we spent the night in fear, in anxiety. He says, then early in the morning we got up, we prayed Salat al-Fajr, we got back on the buses, and we started driving again. The more we drove, the more it felt like we were going nowhere. He says, until it was almost Dhuhr time when our fuel tank became empty. Now here we are, no fuel, no gas, and with dwindling water supplies. The water we had should have lasted us half a day until we get to the border. But our water's almost finished. He says, we got out of the bus. I told everyone, you know what? This is the time we need to do tawassul bi Imam Zaman. There is no other respite. There is no other way out. Let us pray to the Imam. Soon after that, within a couple of hours, the sun and its scorching heat hitting our scalps like nothing else, burning us, the water finished. Allahu Akbar. Ya Imam al-Zaman, Ya Faris al-Hijaz, Ya Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. We began crying, we began weeping until darkness fell. He says, when it was close to Maghrib, I said to them, brothers, I don't want you to lose hope, but it looks like we are hopeless. How are we going to spend the night here? All alone in the middle of the desert, no water, nothing. We had a little bit of food left, but what do you do with food when you don't have water? He said, you know what? I'll tell you this. Let's all dig our own graves so that at least we sleep in those graves And the animals, the scavengers, the beasts don't come and eat our flesh in the night. If we're gonna die, let's at least die in our graves and be covered by the shifting sands, then become food for these animals of the desert. So we dug our graves. Now imagine, when you've dug your grave, you've reached the state of desperation. At that point, you are truly hopeless. So when you turn to Imam al-Zaman and call out, Ya Hujjat ibn al-Hasan, when you recite Dua al-Faraj, you do so like a truly grieving, bereaved mother who has lost her child, not someone who thinks of the Imam every once in a while. He says that with our graves dug, we spent the night in prayer, invoking the name of the Imam, supplicating to him until it was close to Fajr. He says, when Fajr struck, I had left the group. I didn't want to be seen crying and weeping and sobbing, so I had gone a little further out to cry and beseech the Imam of our time. He says, suddenly I looked up and there was a Bedouin man approaching from nowhere, out of the blue, as they say. A Bedouin man approaching with 12 camels. He says, to me this was very strange, but not strange enough to be occupied with the idea that we are in the middle of the desert. There's no civilization to be seen anywhere near. Where is this man coming from? Where is he headed to? I had no idea, but I had my own problems. He says, as soon as I saw him, I walked up to him. I said, Assalamu alaikum. He replied by saying, Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. He then says, I looked at him. He was the most beautiful person I had ever seen. I saw his khal, he said. I saw the whiteness of his face. I saw that beautiful flowing beard of his. And even though he dressed like a Bedouin, he looked nothing like a Bedouin. Those desert-dwelling Bedouins in the empty quarter usually have a very dark complexion, and yet he looked very different. He says, but that wasn't enough to provoke any curiosity. Again, I was occupied with my own problems. He says, because Ayatollah Namazi had spent time in Iraq, he had studied in Najaf, he spoke with an Iraqi accent. And those of you who speak Arabic know that Iraqi accent is distinct from Hijazi accent. Sometimes they have difficulty communicating, difficulty understanding each other. And we have a hadith that the Imam of our time would speak to people in their own dialect, in their own language. We have a hadith where the Imam spoke to a man from Iran with a Mashhadi Persian accent. We have a hadith where the Imam would speak in a Syrian and Lebanese accent to those who were Syrian and Lebanese from Sham. We have a hadith that the Imam spoke in Hebrew. The Imam spoke in different languages depending on who he was talking to. So Ayatollah Namazi says that I told him, إحنا مضيعين, in an Iraqi dialect. We're lost. So he says immediately, he said, أنا جاي أدليكم, in an Iraqi accent, I'm here to show you the way. He says, so I told him, where is the way? What do we do? He said, here is what you do. Sheikh Ismail, he mentioned my name. He said, Sheikh Ismail, go to the bus driver. First off, don't let Asghar Agha drive, because it was his fault that you ended up where you are. Ask Mahmoud Agha to be the driver. Number one. Number two, again, he said, number two, one of the things that they had done, they had made an intention when they were in the state of desperation, beseeching Imam al-Zaman. They all came to an agreement, I forgot to mention this, that if they could survive this ordeal, they would take all of their money, all of their possessions, and give it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and lead a life of virtue, a life of purity, avoid any and all sins. The Imam, or this man, said to Sheikh Ismail, he said to him, go tell your friends, not to give all of their money and their possessions as soon as they make it out of this alive, because you're now headed towards Iraq. You're going to Karbala and Najaf and Samarra. You will need this money. You will need to spend on this journey. So tell them to keep this money even though they have made a nadhr. This nadhr is not acceptable. Keep your money until you get back to Mashhad. When you go there, you can give money in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all you want, but not now. So that's number 2. Number 3, he said, you see those 2 mountains? If you go through those 2 mountains and turn left, you will find the border between Hijaz and Iraq. Go there. This is where you intended to go, and wait there. Your caravan with the 99 other buses will arrive tomorrow, and you will in fact get there before they do. He says, so I went back to the group. I told them that this is what this man is telling us. This is the way. This is what you need to do. This is who the driver is. Let's go. He says, but my group told me, having gone through that phase, that period of fear for your life, they said, could you please ask him, because you can speak Arabic, ask him to join us, to come along with us. In case we get lost again, let him take us to the border. Let's have him come with us to the border, and then he can leave us. He says, I walked up to him. I took a copy of the Quran that I had. I said to him, oh man, I beg you in the name of this Quran that you come along with us. We're too afraid. He said, the man told me, why did you have to swear in the name of the Quran? I would have come to you. I would have come with you anyway. You didn't have to speak like this. I'll come, it's okay. He says, so he came along with us. He got on the bus. He told Mahmoud Agha, turn on the ignition. He turned it on. We started driving towards those 2 mountains. Remember, the car had no fuel. Remember, the car's engines had failed. He says, I did not think of that. All I could see was a stranger coming to our rescue, Ana jaya dallikum, showing us the way, telling us to do things, and we were doing as he instructed. We drove and drove and drove until we arrived between those 2 mountains. Through that valley, we turned left as he had instructed us. We saw the border. We got out of the car. He says, when we got out of the car, we were overjoyed. We were in a festive mood. We were praying to Allah, Alhamdulillah, salawat, this, that. So then we took out some food that we had. We started eating, and we offered the food to this stranger. He says, I offered him some food. He refused to eat with the utmost politeness. But he said, I can't have any. Others offered some nuts and fruits and what have you. Again, he said, I cannot have this food. He didn't eat from our food, but he said, you are where you wanted to be, so head back to where you came from. He said, so I went up to him. I said to him, could you please stay with us until our buses arrive? He said, I would, but I have a lot of things I need to do, a lot of things I need to attend to, a lot of people I need to look after, so I have to leave you here. So he bid us farewell. I looked to one side for a second, then I looked back, only to see that he was gone. As soon as he disappeared, I started asking myself these questions. How did he know my name? Why did he speak with an Iraqi accent? How did he get the bus moving? How did he know that we had made that nadhr? How did he know the way out of that predicament? Where did he emerge from? Who is this man? I began crying and remembered the Imam of our time, beating my head, saying, how hopeless am I that the Imam would come to me and I don't recognize him? How miserable, how unfortunate am I that I would see the Imam but not be able to connect with him as the Imam of my time. Brothers and sisters, we have to be desperate.
يا حسين